You finally get your script into the hands of someone in the industry, and they start reading. But 3 pages in, they put it down and give it a pass. Well, what happened? What went wrong? Your story was smoking, and you had it all lined up perfectly. So why did the reader stop reading? Chances are you've not done one of the 10 things that you must do in the first 10 pages of your screenplay to effectively connect with the reader. And we're going to assume, all things being equal, that your story and your writing are just fine. Those are not the problems. But so many writers make these mistakes that I'm about to tell you, and I want you, when you finally get your script read by someone in the industry, whether it's a contest submission or a result of a successful query, I want you to find success. And that means you need to be doing these 10 things. Some have to do with story, some have to do with storytelling, and some have to do with you. And number 10 is one of the most overlooked by screenwriters, so be sure you're doing all 10 of these. Okay, here we go. Number 1, you must establish the world of your story. We have to make sure the reader knows what the setting is and what some of the rules are within that world. Now, the setting has to do with where and when a story takes place. And while you can be a little vague about the setting on the first page or two, if we're 4 or 7 pages in and the reader still can't tell you where or when your story takes place, you're probably in serious trouble, because what you're doing is you are not giving the reader any context with which to make sense of the story that you're telling. So it's fine if you start your story in a dark room, dungeon-like. Dark gray brick was the building material of choice. But if your slug line doesn't make it clear where you are, and you don't give the reader enough information to figure out if this room has even electricity or if it's lit by candlelight just because there isn't any electricity, okay, your reader will be confused. And confusion in this case is bad. And as a reminder, you are writing a script that's meant to be read. So it has to make sense to a reader, not a director, not an actor, not a producer, a reader. Every one of those people, yes, may read your script, but when they do, they're reading it with the hat of a reader first. And if you aren't clear on the setting, they will be confused. And we, as people, we can only handle being confused for so long before we bail. But the setting alone isn't enough. You have to establish at least a few of the rules of the world. Is it modern day, or is it just like modern day? Is it steampunk or Victorian, or set in the future? And if it's set in the future, what's the world like? Can people fly? Can cars? Are there still cell phones, or is it an implant? And you don't have to give all of the rules, okay? In fact, that'd be bad if you do. But you do need to give some inkling, some sense of what this world is like. And if you aren't giving at least a little bit of this, the reader is going to be lost, and they'll put your script down, and that'll be it. Number 2, your first pages should clearly establish the tone of your story. So if you're writing a comedy, there better be some jokes on page 1 and page 2 and page 3, or some funny things happening all throughout. If you can't even garner a chuckle out of the reader by page 2 and you're writing a comedy, well, I'm sorry, it's not a comedy. It's something for the garbage can because their reader is gonna pass. If it's a sci-fi, then there should be some sci-fi elements in it. Like by page 2, I mean, have someone shoot a laser gun, or someone do some cool techie thing. Have someone look out the window and all we see is deep space. And if it's a horror, something scary right off the bat. I mean, I better be freaking out by page 5 or you're not writing a horror film. But worse than not matching your intended tone is writing a first set of scenes that make your film feel like a horror movie, only to then have a bunch of scenes that make it feel like a rom-com. Like the scenes are from 2 different screenplays somehow got mixed together. And nothing pulls a reader out of a script faster than when the first 3 or 4 pages have a very specific tone that doesn't match the rest of the script. Because if a producer wants a scary movie, but your first scary element is on page 15, okay, that producer is never gonna read that far because the first few pages felt like a comedy. They don't produce comedies, they do horror. So get your intended tone right from the word go. The reader is probably going to hate your script if you mess this one up. But nothing makes a reader put your script down faster than if you don't do this next one on the list. You must do it. Number 3, your first page should introduce a character dealing with conflict. When we see characters deal with conflict, you know what that does to us as readers and viewers? It forces us to be concerned about the events that are transpiring. And it doesn't mean we have to root for the character or even like them, but we do have to be concerned about what happens next. So when you introduce a character, it's fine to give the reader a moment to kind of ground themselves. We see the character in an environment that we can track with, and then conflict right away. Don't make us wait. I've read so many scripts where we meet the protagonist or other key characters in the first few pages, but they aren't doing anything. They're just talking, or doing chores, or driving to work, or buying a coffee, or talking to their spouse about their plans for the day. No, we need conflict, and like right now. Now, please don't mishear me on this one, because we don't have to meet your protagonist on page 1 and see them in the midst of conflict. Your story may start with what's essentially a teaser, a setup event that lays some groundwork for your story or introduces the villain or some other character or whatever. So I'm not saying you have to introduce the protagonist on page 1. Many stories actually don't, but I am saying that any character you introduce early in your script should be immediately dealing with some conflict. Here's one way to know you don't have enough conflict soon enough. You may have gotten a note on your script that you need to move your inciting incident sooner to get things started quicker. But do you know what the reader is actually saying? They're saying you don't have enough conflict happening soon enough, but because you've got some conflict in the inciting incident, well, just move that sooner. But the thing is, this is a bad note, and the reason you're getting it is because of your own fault. You don't have enough conflict soon enough to invite the reader to begin empathizing with the people and events in your story. So, conflict sooner, moving on. Number 4, in the first few pages, the reader needs some inclination, either implied or just outright overt, about what the central conflict of the story is gonna be. At the beginning of Star Wars: A New Hope, Princess Leia's ship is captured by Darth Vader's. He's gonna be a problem. At the beginning of Infinity War, Thanos is killing Asgardians and wanting the Tesseract. He's going to be a problem. At the beginning of Toy Story, Buzz Lightyear is introduced to the rest of Andy's toys. This is gonna be a problem. At the beginning of 10 Things I Hate About You, Kat is already being dissed by popular girls and she tears down a poster for the upcoming prom. She's gonna be a problem. And we get that before the opening credits even stop rolling. So if no one knows the tone of your story or anything about the world of your story, or sees any character dealing with conflict in your story, or has no idea about the central conflict that will be part of your story, you're done. They're passing on your script and moving on to something else. Now, those 4 things are related to story elements that you gotta have in your first 10 pages. But what about the storytelling pieces you gotta have, the way you tell the story? The first of these makes number 5 on our list, which is as you begin telling your story, you have to ground the reader so they feel like they're standing on something solid. And while the story element was establishing the world of your story, the setting and the rules, the way you communicate that is the storytelling part. And what you have to consider and what you have to make sure that you're doing is giving your reader some solid ground to stand on, no matter how foreign the world of your story is to our current world. There has to be some familiarity about the world you're creating, at least some common ground for us to start walking together. It can be big thing, it can be a small thing, but it has to be something that any reader would say, oh, okay, I can connect with this. It sounds familiar, even if they've never been or have no frame of reference for where your story is going to take place. So it's perfectly fine to have a story set in another time period. We've all seen these stories, and my guess is many of you have written one of those, either a historical fiction or something set in the future, and in your film you might have maybe oversized tanks or weapons that shoot plasma bolts or characters with super speed and strength, but you don't start the story there. You start in modern day, in the Arctic Circle, with a crashed aircraft. That makes sense. I can ground myself in that. And then you introduce the other pieces one bit at a time. But you even maybe give us a bit of sci-fi tech to make us realize that we're in a more advanced universe where laser drills are schlepped all the way to the Arctic Circle and they can cut through a metallic plane and the ice. And then we get to see Captain America's shield, frozen, We are grounded first and then invited into this new world. So if you're going crazy in the first few pages with aliens or zombies that fly or whatever, make sure you take at least a moment to ground your reader so they can have some solid footing. Having a clear world and settings and rules, yes, that's going to help, but some writers want to get to the action so fast that they forget that the reader doesn't see the world like you do. And if you just drop them in the deep end of the ocean, you don't know if they can swim, and they may drown, and drowning is pretty much all the way around a bad thing. So a good way to visualize this is to imagine your title page as a doorway to the world you are creating. When the reader turns the page, turns that title page and starts reading, you're inviting them to participate in the story. You're bringing them along, leading them into the world, inviting them inside the house that you have built. You don't want to just open a portal and suddenly they fall through and have no idea what's going on. That's never a good strategy. So ground your reader in the telling of the story. Give them some things initially that they can easily understand and know where they're at and stand on, and then invite them into the glorious world that you've created. Number 6, white space on the page is your friend. How you tell your story is not just the words you use, but how they're laid out on the page. When you create more white space on the page, you're communicating to the reader that this story is going to be a fun, breezy read. If you want to have larger chunks of your description and the meat of your screenplay, that's fine, but not in the first 10 pages. Make those read quickly. You want the reader to be reading and suddenly realize, oh, I'm already on page 15. This is really good. But if the read is a slog, if your sentences are too flowery, too cluttered, too wonky, if you have no white space and margin to margin words and big blocks of text, that's too dense, especially for the first few pages. The reader has to struggle to read them, and that makes them start to dislike the story, even if the story itself is fine. So how you structure the words, how you manipulate the white space, how you guide the reader through the story, those are things that matter. So you got to pay attention to them. And that leads into number 7 on our list, which is you want to give reasons to the reader to turn the page. Now, I'm not saying manipulate the white space in such a way that it looks like you don't know what you're doing with the screenplay format. I'll get to that in a second. But you do want to space things out so the bottom of, especially page 1 and probably page 2, at the bottom of those pages are kind of cliffhanger moments. Perhaps a question is asked that we want to know the answer to. Perhaps someone is in peril and we need to know if they get out. Perhaps the situation resolves in a way that then makes the reader ask, okay, so what's next? And you can help the reader turn the page by giving them a reason to turn the page. And the key question you want the reader asking is, what's next? Or what happens next? If the reader is asking that question, they'll more often than not turn the page and keep reading. So how do you give them a reason to turn the page, Jake? Well, I'm glad you asked, because that's number 8. Use mystery. As humans, we are curious people, and when we get curious about something, we will seek out an answer or more information. And mystery is actually one of the best non-emotional tools to use in storytelling to force a reader, yes, I said force a reader to keep reading.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Anytime you introduce a mystery, the audience is going to want to stick around for the answer. And mystery is an important storytelling tool you can use in the first several pages of your screenplay because the audience isn't quite sure yet if they're going to invest in the characters of the story. They haven't spent enough time with them.
Enough of this. Reda, release him.
As you wish.
You see, your job as a storyteller is to create an emotional effect within the audience, to get them to respond emotionally. And the way audiences respond emotionally are in relation to the characters of the story and what the characters are going through. But you're on page 1 or 3 or 7 of your story, and the audience doesn't fully care about your characters yet. So you, as a storyteller, have to give them something to care about. You have to fabricate and force their hand to want to continue reading by giving them something non-emotional because they aren't emotionally invested yet. And one of the best ways to do that? Mystery. Jansen's gonna flip when he sees this. And the audience is all, well, who's Jansen? And why is he gonna flip? Turn the page and find out. It's a mystery, and we want mysteries to be resolved. But a word of warning, don't go crazy here, okay? A little bit of mystery goes a long way. Plus, there's a bunch of other things you're trying to do in the first several pages, so make sure you're conveying your story in the best way possible. Don't clutter it up with unnecessary mystery. So a bit of mystery, okay, that can help force the reader to keep reading when they aren't yet tied into the story emotionally, and it gives you time to craft that emotional connection in a way that you're wanting to craft it. But if you put too much mystery in there and not enough story, that's going to create a whole other set of problems, so we don't want that. So yes, use mystery, but be judicious about where and how much you use in the first few pages. So to this point, we've covered 4 story things that you need to be doing, 4 storytelling things that you need to be doing in the first 10 pages, but there's 2 more things that you must do in the first 10 pages, and these relate to you, the screenwriter. The thing is, while people who make movies are looking for good stories that are well told, that's 100% true, they're also paying attention to whether or not they can trust you as a storyteller. Whether you are good people or not, whether you are a good member of the screenwriting community, whether they might actually want to work with you, regardless of whether they buy this script that they're reading or not. So there's 2 more things that you need to be doing in the first 10 pages that help them know you are good people, that they can trust you as a storyteller and as a screenwriter. So number 9 on our list, in the first few pages, you must demonstrate your facility with the craft and with the format of screenwriting. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't have mistakes, but at the same time, you shouldn't have any mistakes, especially in the first few pages. I mean, if you don't care enough about your story to eliminate all the errors in the first several pages, why should anyone else care enough about your story to read it or even buy it? I mean, this is your baby. It's your creation. You want to show it off, right? I mean, you want it to be flawless, so make sure that it is. Neither laziness nor ignorance are excuses. Submit error-free drafts. Beyond that, you have to demonstrate in your writing that you can handle writing in screenplay format, that you are a solid writer and can handle the English language in written form. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't break the standard guidelines either. You can do things differently as long as you're being consistent, as long as it makes sense to the reader, and as long as you aren't doing something so foreign to screenwriting that the reader thinks, okay, this writer has no idea how to format anything. What you must remember is that you are demonstrating your facility, your abilities in working within the craft of screenwriting. In some ways, your script is your resume to show how good of a screenwriter you are. So be consistent, eliminate errors. You'll be just fine. But there's one more thing that you, the screenwriter, need to be doing in the first 10 pages of your screenplay, and it's probably one of the most important things that you need to be doing. Number 10, teaching the reader how to read the script. I realize on one level that just hearing that kind of sounds a little dumb, right? The reader of the script is a reader. They know how to read. Of course they know how to read a script, Jake. But that's the point. They know how to read a script. But do they know how to read your script? Your script for your unique story. This piece impacts a lot of things. Your voice, your vocabulary, how you move from scene to scene, how you use different types of punctuation, how you use bold and underline and italics. I mean, all of those things are tools that you have at your disposal to tell a story. And you have to be using them consistently early on in very clear ways so the reader knows how to interpret them. Not just at the beginning of your script, but when you do that same thing on page 53 and again on page 87, they will know what you're doing. So when you use an M dash, are you using that in a consistent way that the reader can understand? So that when they come across it later, they're going to know how to interpret it. Or what about how you format slug lines? Is it consistent? Or mini slugs? Or supers? Or how you use parentheticals? I mean, as a screenwriter, you have a lot of flexibility in how you use punctuation and formatting tools. But how are you using those tools for this story? So let me give you an example from NIGHTCRAWLER. In this script by Dan Gilroy, notice how right off the bat, he's breaking a few rules. No formal slug lines, all mini slugs. And there's a uniquely formatted billboard sign. We are literally 3 lines into the script, but notice again on page 7, Mayhem Video. Same thing. There is nothing in the script that says close on or close up or rack focus or anything like that. Just big and bold, exactly like it was on page 1. Dan is teaching the reader how to read the script. And even though he's breaking some of the standard guidelines, he's not doing it carelessly or whimsically. He's being intentional, and it feels like you are in good hands. This writer clearly knows what he's doing. And that's what I mean when I say you have to teach the reader how to read your script. Your story is a unique story. And by definition, that means that your screenplay will be a unique screenplay. It will look like a screenplay, at least it should look like a screenplay. It will feel like a screenplay, but it'll have your unique fingerprints all over it. So yes, your first 10 pages absolutely have to get into your story and the characters and all those things, of course. But if you aren't doing these other 10 things that I've just mentioned within these first 10 pages, you're probably not going to get the positive reactions to your screenplay that you were hoping for. And don't forget about using mystery, which is a powerful storytelling tool. And if you want to dive more into that magical storytelling tool of mystery, you can do that right here. Thank you so much for watching. There's fun buttons below and links below if you want my help. And when you decide to tell a story that matters. See you later.